Yay.
Okay. Good for you.
Okay. Hello, Neil. This is Celeste. Hope you're there. We're going to go ahead and start the meeting, I think. We're expecting a few more people.
Neil's muted, so.
Okay. Well, when Neil wants to unmute, we'll talk. We'll hear him talk.
Here comes Neil, our Neil.
The other Neil. Hi, Neil Bergstrom. Okay. So we have a few things on the agenda. SAS from Oregon registered for this, so I thought that they might want to say some things about the Oregon election coming up with to adopt star voting, and we can add that to the agenda. But meanwhile, the three agenda items we have are action items, follow up to the Littleton City Council letter to General Assembly, and talk about Prop 131. So you all, when you signed into these meeting norms, so I'm not going to go over them. Here's what happened at the last meeting. Neil McBurnett, your name is on there under the second bullet point, so maybe you're on the agenda for this time because that action item is still pending. We've been having long run conversations about Prop 131. These IRV timing questions are going to be answered today. We talked about the PR campaign, and that's about it. Let's do introductions, and I will stop sharing my screen. Neil, do you want to, we lost Beth already. Okay, Neil, do you want to, which one of you Neils want to start the introductions or call on people to introduce themselves?
I hope people aren't having a hard time clicking in for some reason. This is strange.
No. Deborah Lycan, I know, is planning on coming. Betsy McBride always comes. So I don't know. Pat, why don't you go first?
Sure. I'm Pat Venturo, member of the voting methods team for the Boulder League. Have been on the team a long time. I mostly do logistics chores, so that's it. Retired for a very long time. Neil Bergstrom, why don't you go?
Yes, I'm a member of the Arapahoe Douglas County League. I guess I'm interested in voting methods. I haven't really been active on the committee or anything, but I wanted to find out more about the voting methods and what it really means if it passes in Colorado.
We are so happy to discuss it with you. We love doing that, so great. Neil McBurnett, you want to go next?
Neil McBurnett, longtime voting methods enthusiast, auditing enthusiast.
Okay, and you're in the Boulder County area.
Expert, not just enthusiast.
Expert in post-election audits, particularly risk limiting audits. Betty Keller, are you from Vermont?
I am.
Wow, welcome.
Yeah.
What brings you here to Colorado's meeting?
I'm also the point person for ranked choice voting here in Vermont.
Okay, so.
And so maybe I'm at the wrong meeting. I thought this was going to be on alternative voting methods, a webinar.
Not a webinar, but it's a meeting, and
okay.
We have on the ballot a Final Four voting initiative, like Alaska.
Okay.
So
right.
So we're going to be talking about that. That could be really interesting for you.
Well, it would be very interesting for me. So right now, Vermont, in the last legislative session, well, in 23, had the state Senate had passed something to do ranked choice voting for just the presidential primary, but create a committee to look at what else we might do for other offices. And then they didn't want to touch changing anything in the election during election year, so nothing happened in 24. But as soon as the session opens, we're expecting it to be reintroduced. And we didn't get that opportunity to have that extra 2 years to have done the study session since the House didn't pass it back in 23, which is another whole story. But anyway, I'm hoping that instead of just following what Maine did, I'm hoping that we would do more like Alaska, but use final 5 instead of 4, because we have 3 major parties. And so in case we don't want the whole ballot taken up with like 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, we want to have room for all other parties.
Very interesting. We're actually going to talk about that, and you bring up an excellent point. So I hope you stick around for that discussion, because great, wonderful. Okay.
And I'm also particularly interested, so the League of Women Voters has a position encouraging people to try different methods of voting, but they don't specifically support ranked choice voting. And by that, I mean that our Senator Welch proposed a bill that would help to finance the machinery that people need if their current machines, tabulators, don't do ranked choice voting. They'd have to upgrade the machines. And when we asked if during the convention, when we were doing our visits to our legislators, or maybe it was even after that, anyway, we asked if we could endorse or support his bill publicly. And they said, no, that's a federal thing. And that's why we're sending our federal action request form. But we don't have a position that would support that. So I was surprised because I thought we did.
I'm pretty sure we can support better elections, and better machines will help with better elections. But in terms of like supporting the U.S. Fair Representation Act, we have Paula Lee in California is very unhappy with the National League because they are not making this a priority, even though we have a position that supports proportional representation. So we feel
I'm
your
going to be
pain.
I'm going to be very interested to see how you guys do, because we are a tiny state with a tiny chapter, and so we don't get that much attention if we say we'd like to do something on a federal action request form, but you guys may have more clout.
Yeah, no, I am very interested to hear your response. If you can provide any documentation of how and when they said that.
I'll check in
you're
with
talking about
Sue.
a state issue. You're not talking about any federal legislation, right?
No, I'm talking about federal legislation.
No.
So our state
Oh,
already bought the tabulators for upgrading.
Yeah.
But this is a U.S. Senator Welch who proposed a federal bill to use federal funds to help pay to upgrade the tabulators,
okay.
so that the funding
little
wouldn't be
different.
in the way of a state deciding whether to pursue it or not.
Right. Okay. Got it.
So you talk about RCV, and you mentioned presidential primaries, and I'm assuming that's like the 15% threshold kind of RCV, proportional allocation 15%, because then there's also instant runoff voting for single winners, and then there's the regular proportional single transferable vote that is used in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Right. So we currently, I'm sort of hogging on Vermont when you had Colorado things you wanted to do, but the presidential primary is divided up that you have a 15% threshold for the Democrats, or the Republicans, maybe 20% threshold. It's harder to get on to get the delegates on the Republican ballot, I believe. But so this would be transferring your vote. So Vermont has a late primary, and for instance, on the last, not this one, but in 2020, right before our primary, Warren dropped out of the race, and so she wasn't eligible. But if you had mailed in your ballot, which many people did, then you lost your opportunity to have a say. So this would be addressing that if the candidate that you voted for dropped out, then your vote would transfer to the next candidate who's still in. I
Okay.
think also that if you voted for somebody who didn't get enough delegates, your vote could move up to somebody else and have the possibility for you having a say in how that proportion of delegates is distributed.
In the chat, I put in an article that the local Boulder County League wrote about what is RCV anyway. So you can go through and check out the videos and see which one refers to the kind of presidential election you're talking about. So why don't we move on to, I hope you do stick around because I want to hear about, I want to hear about Final Five and the reasons for doing Final Five. That's fascinating to me. Okay. Betsy, would you introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. Betsy McBride, League of Women Voters of Idaho. And in Boise, we have open primaries, RCV, on our fall ballot.
The Final Four voting, basically.
Yeah,
like
the
us.
Final Four.
Yeah. Deborah, so glad you could join us.
Hi, sorry I was late. I'm in Durango and I've been sitting in on this committee for some time and gradually getting smarter. And I gave a presentation to two small groups of people on Proposition 131 that went pretty well. The first
you
one
so
not so
much.
well, and the second one better.
Yeah. And I'm Celeste Landry and I'm the facilitator for this group. And I have a very thick skin, so if you need to interrupt or tell me I'm doing something wrong, just do it. Okay, let's go ahead and work through the agenda. There is at 7 o'clock there, we're cutting the meeting at 7, or I'm leaving at 7, because there's a discussion of this book, Making Democracy Count, How Mathematics Improves Voting, Electoral Maps, and Representation. And there's information once I share my screen about that. So, okay, we did introductions. And here we'll talk about some things that happened. So I gave a presentation to Estes Park on September 18th. We did an actual voting exercise like Prop 131 with a primary and a general. Usually you'll have different people vote in the primary and the general. Usually you'll have a lot more people in the general. We actually had fewer people in the general than we had in the primary. The results were quite interesting.
How many people attended your event?
It was about 35. The numbers are in there. I updated the slides and you can see how the numbers turned out. There was somebody who kept saying that you had to rank all the candidates or you would your ballot would not count, and he got angry and actually walked out. And I think there were like 4 ballots that looked very similar. And we're not doing serious election security. I have a lot of respect for election officials, and I feel like somebody stuffed the ballot box a little bit in the primary. So, and it might have been the guy who left. I don't know. Anyway, interesting. So, Marcus Ogren, who's also in the Boulder County League, but they live in Israel, was on this panel with a famous guy, Nicholas Tiedemann. I'm not sure you pronounce. Anyway, and so all these slides are available via our folder, which is available via the Alternative Voting Methods Task Force webpage. So you can see it if you'd like to. I just started watching it. I haven't seen very much of it yet. The October 15th event is Deborah's. Thank you for doing that. And over the weekend, there were 2 showings of Counted Out, which is a film that highlights the importance of math in a democracy. And I sent this out in an email announcing this meeting. I don't know if anybody saw it. If any of you have seen it, please speak up because we're thinking about showing it. So, okay. There are some upcoming Prop 131 events that you might want to know about tomorrow evening. Rocky Mountain Community Radio is going to be airing a call-in show. Andrea Wilkins, the league lobbyist, will be speaking, as well as Allie Belknap from Common Cause, I think. So they'll be answering questions. I'm going to try to listen. And then on Thursday is an interesting debate at DU, and you can also listen to the live stream. It's hosted by DU, Colorado Politics, and the Denver Gazette. The proponent's Kent Theory is quite famous as the money behind this. And Nick Troiano, who's with Unite America, and he wrote a book, The Primary Solution, will be speaking in favor of it. And then Jason Lupo, who's from Colorado Voters First, something like that. And Candace Stutrium, who actually was one of the proposed some oppositional initiatives through the title board, but they didn't collect signatures. It's not on the ballot. So it seems to me it's like, I think the two opponents are definitely Republican kind of opponents. I don't know if that is going to color how things go. I mean, I think Ken Theory was a Republican at one point. I think Nick Troiano was a Republican, then ran for Congress as an unaffiliated. So it's kind of interesting. It's anyway, could be worth watching. Okay, other upcoming events. I mentioned this book discussion right after this meeting, and I'll put the Zoom link at the end of the meeting, and they'll have part 2 of that discussion next week, same time. Then we have election day, and then every month there's a PR 101 webinar that Fair Vote Canada does.
Celeste, by any chance, do you have these slides up now that we point to?
Yes. Yes.
In chat.
Go to the Alternative Voting Methods website.
Great.
Alternative Voting Methods Task Force website. It tells you where the folder is, and then go to this month's things, and then you can help.
I'll post a link to it.
Betsy, you're muted.
Do you know if they're going to record the Making Democracy Count presentations?
I don't know.
Okay.
Given that it's 2 weeks, I know that some people can only make one of the weeks, but I don't know if they're going to record it.
Okay.
I heard the author speak at another event, and he gave a very interesting math question to people, and I'd be happy to do that at the end if we have time.
Okay.
So it's about the Electoral College. Okay, the next meeting date is November 18th at 5:30, and we already have a speaker for it. Sam Chang of the Balanced Ballot Alliance is going to talk about what a balanced ballot is. A balanced ballot allows you to give a positive vote to somebody or a negative vote. That's the plurality version. You get one vote, and you can either do positive or negative, depending on if you feel more strongly for somebody or more strongly against somebody. Then there's also this idea that you could have a balanced approval voting ballot, and you could vote yes or no, like yes +1, no -1 on every candidate. They also have versions for ranked voting, where you can give positive and negative scores with ranked voting. So if you want to learn more about that, come next month. Okay, let's talk about the action items. You found the slides. Thank you, Neil. I'm just going to look and see what's going on here. Okay, Neil's hanging out in the chat. Got it. Thank you. Okay, How do I close this now? There we go. Okay, Neil, you had an action item left over from July. Did you hear back from Ruth about making proportional approval voting an online election option?
I have not heard back from Ruth. You know, the background here is that we have code online, open source code, to tabulate proportional approval voting elections. This is a way to do to elect a committee or a council or a piece of a legislature or whatever, just by voting yes or no on each of the candidates, approval voting, but in a way that pretty much guarantees that that the voters will be as happy as they can be with the outcome. And so this is just an action item to try to link that software or software like it to various online voting methods, which a lot of people have put their voting methods online. And we'd like to have a method like that available so that, for example, the League of Women Voters, which nominally supports alternative voting methods, might actually be able to do so in practice at its conventions. So still working on it.
Neil. Okay, thanks, Neil. I'm trying to, okay, and here's what an approval voting ballot is. You can vote for as many as you want. You would not vote for everybody unless you don't want your ballot to have any influence. Okay, and then the other action item from last month is about the Secretary of State and instant runoff voting elections. And here's a ranked ballot, and I'd be shocked if you all did not know what one of these looked like. So, okay, the issue was that a municipality has a certain deadline by which they have to ask the county to coordinate an instant runoff voting election. And that deadline is before the candidate filing deadline has passed. So the municipality might not know if they're going to have an IRV election or not. It depends on the number of candidates who file. If only one candidate files or only two candidates file, you won't have an election, an instant runoff voting election, because you don't need to rank candidates. You've only got one or two. And this actually happened in Broomfield. They were supposed to have an IRV election, and they ended up not having it because they had maximum two candidates for any of their seats. So the answer to this question is the municipality should go ahead and request the IRV election. If only one or two candidates files for each seat, then you just cancel the IRV election and hold a plurality election like Broomfield did. Okay, the next question was, we were told that it seemed like county clerks could only coordinate an IRV election for municipalities in odd years. And those of us who live in Boulder know that Boulder's planning to move its municipal elections to even years. So that would be a big problem. Boulder doesn't want to do our own elections. And the answer is that coordinated elections usually refer to November odd year elections when they use that term, coordinated elections. And then for even years, they say general elections. But yes, general elections are also coordinated, so not a problem. Okay. We'll move on to the next item, okay? So this is about a Littleton City Council letter to the legislature. It was approved October 15th, so Tuesday, via the consent agenda, and the link for the agendas is right there. And this is what the letter said. We are writing to urge you to consider introducing legislation that provides alternative voting methods to enhance participation. The city of Littleton is in 3 counties, so they have to coordinate with 3 county clerks. So if they don't get this state legislation, they're not going to want to use any other voting method. Right now, there are 2 voting methods allowed in Colorado in statute. One is regular plurality, either choose one or choose N if you're electing N seats. And the other is instant runoff voting. statute actually says single transferable vote, the proportional RCV is allowed, but there are no rules for making that happen, so no county clerk will do it. So Littleton didn't say what voting methods are asking for. There's been a fair amount of discussion in Littleton about approval voting, but like the Arapahoe elections director says, oh, we can't do approval voting. I've heard a contrary view from somebody who knows that, yes, they should be able to do it because there's no problem. It's just like plurality voting, except there are no overvotes.
I just want
Because,
to step back a minute.
yeah,
I think you said that no county would do a particular kind of election. I don't know if it was STV or IRV, but I think, do we know that for a fact, or we just know that they might have an out if they didn't want to?
well, they definitely have an out.
Yeah.
For STV, and maybe they don't have an out for approval voting.
Yeah, I agree, but back to
but-
STV, it seems to me that a county could say,
Oh,
yes, we'll do that.
I think they could. Do you think they would? I think that they don't want to do anything unless they've got
we
the
have
rules for it.
4 counties, and some county clerks are pretty opinionated about a whole bunch of different issues. So I wouldn't put it, I wouldn't discount that notion at all.
Well, I would love to have, I mean, they could call it a pilot if they want, because
Exactly.
risk limiting and audits were piloted, but
That's exactly right.
any of you live in counties that have a county clerk that might be willing to do this? Maybe we need to worry about this in our elections, you know? So,
Right.
are all county clerks elected in 2 years from now?
I think it's staggered.
So half are elected this
I
year
don't
and,
know if it's officially staggered, but not sure.
okay, that's a question to find out, because that would be really good to know. Okay. So, an idea is, should we support Littleton with a follow-up letter to the legislature from our group, our statewide alternative voting methods task force? And if so, do we mention specific voting methods? Anybody have opinions? I mean, I thought maybe mentioning specific methods like approval voting is so easy, it can be done off the shelf. Maybe we don't even need legislation, just have the Secretary of State say, okay.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. If we have any kind of power at all as a task force, this would be a good way to try it out. And the more people who approach the legislature with the same idea, the more I would think they would be likely to at least think about it.
Yeah.
But I don't want to write the letter.
Do you have any opinions on whether we should mention specific voting methods?
I don't think that's a bad idea. I think an awful lot of people, even legislators, don't know much about any alternative methods, except maybe RCV, because that's what they keep hearing about.
Yeah, they're going to think, oh, we've got RCV. What else do you want? Well, we can say, well, we want proportional RCV, which is single transferable vote. Well, we want approval voting because the clerks actually like that more. It's so easy. A lot of clerks like it more. Anyway. Okay, so to do this, we would need a working group. I'm willing to work on a draft letter. It would need to be approved by the Colorado leadership. And I'd love to have other people who want to look at it. I'm not about to send a draft letter to the entire email list, which is more than 100 people, but I could send it to everybody on this list whose email addresses I have, for instance. I don't know if you all would be willing to do
I'll
that.
read it, I'll read anything.
Yeah, I'd love to. see it. Thank you.
Okay, I hear Pat, I hear Neil. Other people are mostly out of town. I heard Neil McBurnett.
Jen probably would be willing to read it too.
Okay. And then, of course, the state league leadership would read it. So I think the lobbyist would read it and our action and advocacy people would read it. So probably before it goes to the board or wherever it has to go to. So, okay, great. I think that's it for that. And now comes the interesting stuff.
So before you continue, I'll just follow up that yes, county clerks are always in an even numbered non-presidential election year in Colorado.
Oh, you've answered the question already. Okay, good. So in 2 years, we should be asking this at every candidate forum. Okay. Or maybe it'll already be an issue and we can talk about it. Okay, Prop 131. So first of all, just so everybody's on the same page, we're talking about Final Four voting. June, there's an all candidate choose one primary. Only the top 4 vote getters advance to the general. And that's the only way to get on the general election ballot in Colorado. It's not for every office, but it's for most of them. So, and except for the county offices, it's not the county offices. Okay, November is a ranking ballot, single winner, and we use instant runoff voting tabulation. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. And we learned about the state reimbursement rates recently. So counties don't mind doing a presidential primary. They get reimbursed 100%. Only one contest is allowed to be on each primary ballot, and that is the presidential contest. You can't put any municipal questions. You can't put anything else on the presidential primary ballot. The June primary, when all those other contests happen, gets 0 reimbursement rate, which is kind of interesting. The idea, I think, is that the party should be paying for this, not the state.
Yeah.
Anyway. So for the November general election in even years, that's 45% reimbursement. That's I think that's new as starting this year. Because of the bill that passed. In odd years, if there's a ballot measure, it's also 45% reimbursement rate. If it's an odd year without a state ballot measure, the counties get 0% reimbursement, which doesn't happen very often, but it did in 2017.
So Les, can you clarify this? Because I know that there is a slow transition to these payments. Are you positive that for the future that there's going to be 0 reimbursement for some of these elections? I know that in the past, and there was, like probably the last primary was not yet on the schedule for reimbursement.
I can find the fiscal note for the ballot measure for the bill that did this.
Okay.
But I can't do it while I'm also running this meeting.
Yeah, I just haven't heard that raised as a topic, and people are very happy that they got the 45% reimbursement. So check that, please. Thanks.
So you're concerned about the 0% in odd years without a state ballot measure?
Yeah, I'm surprised that that there would be any election in which they wouldn't be reimbursed.
We heard this yesterday from somebody who works in the Secretary of State's office. So I'm pretty sure it's right. And then the interesting thing is Prop 131 increases cost for the primary by more than it increases cost for the general, which doesn't make sense to me necessarily. I'd love to see the breakdown in the numbers, but because the state doesn't reimburse the counties for the primary, that might explain why the local costs, I should have on there, local costs for primary are more than the local costs for the general. Okay. So anyway, interesting information. So here's a question. Oh, Betsy, go ahead.
So in Idaho, who pays for the primaries is turning out to be a significant talking point, because in Idaho, the state is paying for primaries, and of course, one party has a totally closed primary. So the fairness issue has raised its head. People who might not really like the idea are saying we should be able to, everyone should be able to vote if the state is paying for it. Which isn't an issue, obviously, in Colorado, but reimbursement rates turn out to be an issue for our ballot question.
Reimbursement rates are different from costs. You know, it says June primary 0% reimbursement. It still costs money. And I don't know how much of it, if it's all paid for by the parties or how much each county has to pick up for those costs. I don't know. As far as I know, I don't think the parties pay for anything.
Yeah, parties don't pay for anything. And I'm really happy that you raised this point, because in Colorado, parties do have the option of not allowing other people to vote in their primary. And I'm
not having a primary, you mean?
What?
Not having a primary. If they have a primary, they have to let people vote. They can choose everybody through the assembly process.
Right. And so the point being that it is possible for parties in Colorado to set things up so that it is unbalanced in some sense. So that government would be paying for primaries for one party, but not the other, in a situation, as you say, where the party is specifically opted out. But the fairness thing is a useful thing to point out. And one of the criticisms of 131 is, gosh, people can choose already what they want to vote in. And that's really not always true. Thanks.
They can only shop in one store, the Republican store or the Democratic store. They can't shop for a Democratic Secretary of State and a Republican governor. So
or neither one if they are registered with a different party.
Right. Okay. So my question to all of you is, what do you think is going to be the bigger impact of Prop 131? Do you think it's going to be the all candidate top 4 primary, or do you think it's going to be the instant runoff voting general? And the second question is, which one's getting more airplay? Maybe it depends on who you listen to.
Right. I just read an editorial from Mike Litwin, who is a columnist for the Colorado Sun, the Sunriser newspaper, and he's very perturbed that big money is sponsoring this. And even though he admitted he kind of likes the idea of an all candidate primary and using ranked choice voting, he thinks there's going to be much more dark money being poured into this somehow. I mean, nobody has exactly said how, but I just read that in today's Sunriser.
But before we come to the question of what'll have the bigger impact, I have something that I don't know the answer to, and I've tried to study this all a lot. So right now, there is a bill that passed last session that says you can't do ranked choice voting for this kind of stuff until like the sun rotates around the earth instead of the earth around the sun. I mean,
right.
Things that are not going to happen. And the governor has said, we're going to have to fix that if people want this. But my question is, does the all candidate primary go into effect if this passes, if the legislature does nothing. And then we would have what, a regular primary? I mean, a regular general where you can only vote for one?
That's a good question. But I think that they're tied together.
Yeah, I think so too.
So,
I mean,
but that's a good question.
doesn't have one of those statements that, like, you know, if something doesn't happen, then the rest happens regardless.
And that,
It doesn't, a severability clause, you think? You wondering if it has a severability clause?
Yeah.
in Idaho, the initiative overruled the legislature bill that prohibited use of ranked choice voting. But the it's not going into the Constitution,
Right.
so it could pass. And the first day of the session, the legislature could nullify it. But for now, it overrules the state bill that was passed last year.
Okay,
And what did the
but
state bill?
you said there's a constitutional prohibition also?
No, I'm saying because this initiative is not constitutional,
Right, okay.
the legislature can eliminate it the first day.
Okay. Um, and Prop 131 is also statutory. So, and if it were constitutional, the League of Women Voters would not support it because it would all be written in cement and we couldn't change things, and we don't think it's perfect. And there's some changes we would like to see just to reduce confusion for one. Okay. Any other comments? Anybody else want to say what they think is a bigger impact, or which one have you heard more about? I'm curious. Like, did Mike Litland talk about big money in the primary or in the general or just overall, or?
Overall, I think primarily because Kent Theory is the one who's poured all the money in, and it was his idea. So he's skeptical.
Kent
I
Theory
guess-
has,
Sorry, I was gonna make one comment, which is, the small number of people I have talked to in Durango, there are quite a number of people who don't know who Kent Theory is and don't think that that's, so they're not so focused on the money or the potential money. I think the fact that Kent Theory backed this means that people on the Front Range are more worried about this in vague ways that I don't understand. And in Durango, it doesn't seem to be as much of an issue. The people I talked to were more concerned about how will this actually work, and will this increase voters' sense of getting candidates they want to vote for and participation in elections, and that the general election that has higher turnout is going to be more important. And so they were looking really at the idea behind this and not so much about who's sponsoring it.
so they think the general election will be more important. And I tend to agree. I think the biggest impact is not, the biggest impact is the change to the primary election, because right now, so many elections are decided in the primary. Like, I look at my ballot, my state rep, my state senator, my US representative, I don't have to vote for them. It's already decided. They're shoo-ins. So, but under this Prop 131, they would have to compete in the general election. And everybody would, I mean, top 4 viable candidates could go on to the general election. So, yeah, okay, we'll talk some more about all that.
Michael Bennett texted a lot of people too.
Sure did.
Spelling out all of his problems with it.
Did he talk about this question? What happens if one of the top 4 candidates dies or withdraws
No,
between
it was just,
primary and the general?
major bullet points that
Uh-huh.
about money, etc.
So let's look at this scenario. These are all candidates for CD8. Janak Joshi lost in the primary, so he's out. I think it's a he. And so on the general election ballot, there will be 5 candidates. And this is one of the closest races 2 years ago, where the Libertarian candidate got more votes than the margin of error between Yadira Caraveo and the Republican Barbara Kirkmeyer. So some people might say that the Libertarian candidate was a spoiler. But so let's look at that. Who do you think would be the top 4 candidates that would go on if this were the primary ballot?
Well, what were the results in the, oh, well, yeah, we didn't have this slate.
Obviously Caraveo and Evans, but I don't know about the others.
Okay, Joshi got 23% in the primary, 23% of the votes. So I'm assuming both Republicans would advance. We could just say the top 4 candidates all advance and the next 2 don't advance. So, okay, now we've got our 4 candidates that advance. What happens if Caraveo dies or withdraws between the primary and the general? Do you all know what Prop 131 says?
The next, does it say that the next one, so there will be no backup for her is the
No
problem.
Democratic Party backup. Chris Baum of the Approval Voting Party would, if that's the next highest vote getter, would bump up to the final 4 ballot. And then the Democrats would be very unhappy. Like right now, if somebody drops out between the primary and the general, which happened in House District 19 with Jennifer Parenti this year, it happened 2 years ago with House District 10, Edie Hooten, my district. If somebody drops out, a vacancy committee chooses a replacement. If Yadira Caraveo drops out, there's no replacement. Maybe Betty knows all about this, because Betty, you were talking about you'd want to have final 5 so you could have 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and the other party candidate.
Well, you wouldn't assume that that's what it would be. There might only, I mean, so sometimes you don't have that many candidates anyway. So especially at the local level, you'd have to write the bill to not require that you did ranked choice. Well, you don't have to have ranked choice voting if there's only 2 candidates. But then there's also the issue, so there's always more than 5 candidates for the presidential election, or there typically is. But for our August primaries, for our statewide elections and for our state representatives and stuff, sometimes you don't have more than 1 candidate, which I think you mentioned having that sometimes too. So one question is, people talk about, oh, well, you can save money with RCV because then you don't have to do runoff elections. Well, we don't have runoff elections. We just do plurality. So you're not saving money there, but might you save money on the primary? If you don't have more than 5 candidates, you could skip the primary. And now there's the issue of like vetting, that there's, lots of, the debates and all that sort of thing, but you could just do those anyway. Just expect that they're all participating instead of narrowing it down to 2 by that time.
Yeah,
but
we're not worried about saving money at this point. I mean, that's a separate conversation. The question here is, what happens if Yadira Caraveo dies? I mean, is that okay? Suppose Gabe Evans dies. What happens then? What do you think would happen in the election then?
So you guys are a lot bigger than us. We will rarely have more than 5 candidates. I mean, sometimes you'll have more than that, like when there's a major shuffle, like when Leahy retired,
Right.
then everything moved up 1.
Right.
And then you did have you'd have 3 or 4 candidates from the Democrats and 3 or 4 from the Republicans, and then maybe another, a progressive and a libertarian and a marijuana party and what a freedom party, whatever. So you would have a lot of candidates in those years, but like this year, there's nothing that has 5.
Let's go back to this example. If Gabe Evans dies, what do you think the Republicans who supported Gabe Evans will do?
Well, they'll all vote for Joshi.
Yeah, I think he's like an insurance candidate.
Yeah.
And so the Republicans have an insurance candidate, whereas for for Yadira Caraveo, they don't have an insurance candidate. So maybe they need an insurance candidate, or they need to change the legislation so that you can have a vacancy committee of some sort. Neil, you got
it seems like it would be better to have a have the option of the party replacing them, because otherwise you have baloney, like extra people spending time and money and resources and everything, risking their other job to run for this when they're not expecting to actually win.
So what I think of is my congressman, is Joe Neguse, and he's basically a shoo-in, but you'd want an insurance candidate. So we could get Raleigh Heath out of retirement. He's a good Democrat, and Joe Neguse is a Democrat. Raleigh Heath is in his 80s. He uses a walker. He's not going to go out there campaigning, but he's there on the ballot as a backup, as an insurance candidate. Like that's one strategy the parties could do. Or they could pick somebody who is like an up and coming person who just wants the visibility and doesn't plan to actually challenge who the party's front runner. So
in Colorado, can the person run for more than one office? Like we have 2-year terms in our state Senate and state House. So your insurance candidate might be a senator in your state legislature, and they have to drop their other job to be able to be your insurance candidate, which doesn't seem like a wise thing.
No, you can't. You can't run for 2 offices at the same time.
Yeah. Neil's had his hand up for a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there are, what we know from math is that voting is full of strategic possibilities. And that's, yet more obvious in this situation. I mean, my first question, is should we even be spending time on this? How often does a withdrawal happen? Historically, what would it be like? And then separately, how often might it happen if you change the rules? Because the rules would have a huge effect on how often it happened. We've seen candidates who, kind of clearly ran not expecting to finish a term in order to get a vacancy committee to nominate their friend to, take over their office. So that's a serious problem. And
Betty, something like 40% of Colorado legislators are filled through a vacancy committee. They got their job through a vacancy committee.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. And so I worry that, for example, a party might even do something as diabolical as, finding some sort of a centrist candidate finding one candidate who would get on the ballot and then have them withdraw and replace them with somebody else who, in the last analysis, they thought might have a better chance of winning or something like that. So, giving control over this seems problematic. Giving candidates control over this seems even more problematic. I think my guess is, first of all, that the legislature can deal with this problem if it turns out to be a problem that they think they have a solution for. And I fear that and, would expect it. And second, there's a lot of other things to worry about in this than this particular issue, though it's interesting.
So it seems like maybe, if your top 4 candidates, one of them dies, that would be a different circumstance from somebody withdrawing. As far as like this, the strategic gamesmanship of having somebody run for an office and plan to withdraw and replace it with somebody else. You wouldn't have somebody, the dying thing is a different thing. It's not part of a strategy. So maybe you would plan to let a party do it if the candidate died, but not let them just replace it for withdrawing.
But
Somehow
what
we
if-
have
what if
to
they're
write
not
it
a
into
party
the,
candidate?
Pardon me, Deal?
If they're independent or unaffiliated.
Right. Well, then they would, yeah.
Neil
Anyway,
and
sorry.
Neil and
In
Deborah have
my,
their hands up.
In my Colorado's representative district, the representative withdrew, Ruby Dixon withdrew
right,
after she was elected. And
it's
then
different.
there were some complaints that, you know, it was a very small number of people. 40
Right.
people basically picked a replacement for her. And, you know, there's clearly in the current system, there's some opportunities for gaming the system if it was, if people wanted to do that.
That would not change under Prop 131. Prop 131 only affects the people who withdraw or die between the general and the primary and the general. The way I read the legislation, if you are put on the ballot in March at the assembly and you die the day after you're put on the ballot, they can call a vacancy committee and put another person on the ballot. But then once the primary happens and they've picked the top 4, you're out of luck. You can't be replaced with somebody from your party.
But then once the person is in office,
Yeah, that's different. That'll stay the same. For
well, it
the
can't
state
stay the same
legislature.
because right now it's a party vacancy committee that does it.
Yeah.
Somehow there has to be a replacement election.
For US House of Representatives, it's a special election. We saw that with Ken Buck being replaced by Greg Lopez. For US Senate, the governor gets to pick the person. For state legislature, it's a vacancy committee. After you're elected.
Unaffiliated candidate.
What's that?
What if the candidate isn't a member of a party?
So I think that what happens is when you fill in your unaffiliated paperwork, you say, if I am not able to be on the ballot, I die or withdraw, I want these people to be my vacancy committee. That's what happens for RTD. For the regional transportation district, you are supposed to write down who your vacancy committee is. And I don't think many people do, but that's how you're supposed to do it. Deborah, you had your hand up.
Oh, I'm just thinking about how much into the weeds we want to get here on this proposition. I want to kind of bring it back to the question of, it just seems like this is going to go down in defeat. And are there things to be learned from all the editorials and all the papers that have come out against it? And what is the future of this committee after this election in terms of how we're going to move forward other kinds of alternative voting methods and get the public more educated, so that we do get some modification of our voting system and not keep stuck on what we are?
You've asked a lot of good questions. One of the
Perfect
things
questions.
I want to say is that I want Kent Theory or whoever like wants election reform, I want them to think about proportional representation. And that hasn't been in the lens in people's focus right now. So, but you asked some other questions too. Pat, were you going to say something?
I just thought that those were perfect questions for our task force, because where do we go from here?
I don't feel like we have a shortage of things to work on, personally.
And everyone that I hear from says, oh, we think this is going to pass because it's got so much money.
I have no idea. I know that there was one survey they did and it was like 56% supported it with 8 leaning to support it. But that was done in what, early September or something. And now people are paying attention. This is the most expensive of all the ballot measures. So I don't know.
Okay.
I wonder if they've done another survey and they've come with different results, and because it was a Kent Theory funded survey the first time. And I wonder if they're not releasing the results now because they don't look good. I don't know. So, Betsy.
So our early polling had lots and lots of support for open primaries. The polling was done by Boise State University, but a lot of hesitancy about ranked choice voting. So all the ads, the mailings to every house, all the work that's being done is focused on open primaries. The campaign is saying almost nothing about ranked choice voting. And I haven't checked the Secretary of State's campaign finance portal recently, but suddenly the campaign to pass it has $3 million to buy TV ads. Now, I
Ads are
don't
cheap in
think,
Idaho.
yeah, I don't think that came from Idaho activists, but I haven't checked.
Wow.
Deborah?
Oh, I just, maybe I can say something more constructive. I have heard also in Alaska which as a state has a lot of independent voters like we have here in Colorado, that, it's on the ballot again this time as to whether they will keep their Final Four and ranked choice voting or not. And they're focusing on the open primary and not on RCV, just as you were talking about, Betsy, in Idaho. The emphasis is on your freedom to vote for whoever you want and keeping the parties out of controlling your options. So they're also emphasizing the open primary and allowing voters to have that open choice.
I think in Alaska, they don't get on the ballot through caucus and assembly. I think it's very easy, like 30 signatures or something ridiculous, or $25, or I don't know. So it's a little different here.
Mm-hmm.
Here it's harder to get on the ballot. You have to collect a lot of signatures, or which often can cost money, especially for a statewide contest or a CD congressional district contest. So let's go on to the next slide. So how will Colorado react? And the legislature could write a bill changing the statute to allow a party to call a vacancy committee. The major parties might want to run two candidates as insurance in order to prevent a safe seat or competitive seat from falling into the other major party's hands. This is basically what happened in Alaska in the first special election they had, where Mary Peltola was the insurance candidate for Al Gross. Al Gross was like independent, but the Democrats supported him. And he was one of the top 4 candidates, and he dropped out. And I think his supporters all went to Mary Peltola. So if she had not made the top 4, then it would have been 3 Republicans all running against each other, probably, or 2 Republicans and a Libertarian. The final thing is the legislature could do something which isn't a great solution, I think. It could allow write-in candidates in the general election, which Alaska does. So Alaska famously elected Lisa Murkowski as a write-in candidate, but that would be much harder to do here, I think.
That makes the most sense to me.
But they do have, I mean, that is a last ditch effort to allow. Yeah. So, well, I'm glad to hear there's somebody in favor of it. We have a write-in candidate on our ballot. Neil, you can vote for. And the person running against that write-in candidate is saying, I'm running unopposed, but I still want your vote. But she's not running unopposed. Anyway, okay. Here's thought experiment number 2. Will voter turnout increase or decrease in the primary?
Well, our assumption is that it's going to increase.
Well, here's the question. Will there be any offices with more than 4 viable candidates? Because if the one time I told my daughter she didn't have to fill in her primary ballot was when every single race was uncontested, except for Jared Polis had a write-in opponent. And I said, this one time, I can't believe it. I'm telling you, you don't have to vote. And if there are going to be 4 winners and there are only 4 viable candidates, maybe you don't have to vote. Neil, you have your hand up?
No, but that's a
Neil
really interesting
Bergstrom.
question, and that's a really interesting driver. You know, if there are 4 or fewer, then a lot of people might say, you know, the only reason to vote is to kind of give a signal to people of how they might want to vote in the general, which would be an important thing to do. But yeah, they might not have a lot of incentive, you know, fundraising and stuff like that, but wouldn't have much effect. So we did see in Alaska that turnout decreased, and I'm not sure why. And this is one great question to look at.
I was told that they decreased because the voters figured out, I don't need to go vote. There aren't any, there are 4 winners and they are, so I don't need to vote.
Yeah.
So I think Betty mentioned maybe you could cancel the primary. Prop 131 doesn't cancel the primary. In fact, you still have to count all the votes and report them in the primary, even if you only have 4 candidates running or 3. Deborah?
Oh, my only thought was that I think voters who identify with a major party might not be voting in the primary because they think their candidate's going to end up in the general election. But I wonder whether minority voters or people who have felt like they didn't have a voice before and they've got somebody they really want to make into the final 4 in their district, I think those voices might get louder.
And they've never been able to vote in a primary before because they were registered with a minor party. Yeah, maybe they will show up.
Yeah, that is my hope, that this encourages, you know, not only more people to vote, but perhaps even more so, people who really like someone that they don't think can win might
Right.
say, at least we don't have a spoiler problem here. So I'm just going to vote for my long shot just to get them a couple of, you know, a little bit of recognition. So that's my hope.
Yeah.
Would be a good thing.
Here's a ballot that I made up and I showed it last month, but it might be worth showing again. And you can see that there are only 3 contests that have more than 4 people. These are all the candidates who ran for these offices. So a couple of them wouldn't even use instant runoff voting because they only have 2 candidates. But the only offices are US Congress, governor, and state treasurer. And state treasurer is interesting because there are 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and an American Constitution. So there would be some battling here. This one, and it was interesting because in 2018, we had a big shift. Somebody mentioned Leahy resigning. In 2018, that was when Jared Polis announced he was going to resign. He wasn't going to run again for Congress, and instead he was going to run for governor. It was an open seat. And then state treasurer was also an open seat. So you can see the open seats are the ones that have lots of candidates running. I guess Secretary of State also was an open seat. So, but many years you don't have open seats. So you might not feel like you need to worry about voting. And also look at the bottom here. In the Republican voters in Boulder County had no contested DA or county races, so they probably wouldn't even get their primary ballot if it were like this. They would just get the all candidate ballot. They wouldn't get the traditional ballot that we have.
Yeah, but this would give them a huge incentive to run somebody.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So will there be any offices with more than 4 viable candidates? This year, Alaska saw a decrease in primary election voter turnout. And it's thought it's because the primary contests weren't competitive because there were 4 winners. Okay. Our thought experiment number 3, this is the last thing in the agenda, and then I can talk about that fun question that Ismar Volich mentioned about the Electoral College, or we can close the meeting or whatever. Okay, the question is, how will caucus and assembly be impacted? And remember, caucus and assembly is the easy process for getting your name on your party's ballot. The other path to the ballot is to collect a lot of signatures, which can be very time consuming and expensive. And caucus and assembly is all about meeting the movers and shakers of the party. So you want to do that anyway. So I think that's why it's considered easy. Yes, Deborah.
I guess I had a question about, what would be the, if this one fails and we're thinking about what might be a future version, would it be a better or a worse thing to change the number of signatures that are required? Do we want it to be easier to get on the primary ballot, or?
We did this
if
already.
it's
I
election
worked on
is
that
the-
bill.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I worked on that bill. It was House Bill 19-1278, I think.
I
And we
see.
reduced the number of signatures, and we needed to do it because it was based on the number of people who voted in the primary. And when we opened up the primary to unaffiliated voters, suddenly, instead of needing 4,000 signatures, which was a big barrier, you would need like 15,000 signatures to get on the ballot for county commissioner in Boulder. So we got it. So there was not a percentage only. It was like 1,000 signatures or a percentage. And then we changed a bunch of them. So we've already done that. It was fun.
Well, but the question would come up again. Suppose that you're not getting 5 candidates for lots of contests. Do you want to make it easier for people to get on the ballot?
Do you want 5 candidates for every contest?
Do you want people to show up in the primary? You know,
I don't know if I care.
primary at all. Why don't we just ditch the primary and let everybody vote in the general?
Maybe that's what's going to happen de facto. I don't know. So here's what I think is going to happen. I think each major party is going to want to put at least 2 candidates on the ballot, because for all their safe seats and any competitive seats, since you need 30% of the assembly vote to get on the ballot, there's going to have to be some politics, some counting votes, some whipping of votes to make sure that when Joe Neguse runs, yeah, lots of people will vote for him, but at least 30% of the people will vote for the backup candidate who they don't want to be the next, want to elect, but they want the insurance candidate. So there's going to have to be some interesting feeling and dealing. That's the way I see it, at least. I don't know.
That's so fascinating and hard for me to believe, but politics is weird. Yeah.
I think that might be the last slide. Yep. So the next thing is this Zoom meeting, if anybody wants to attend this Zoom meeting. Or if anybody has any other comments, do you want me to tell you the interesting question about the Electoral College?
Yeah.
Sure.
Deborah, you have your hand up.
Well, I guess one of the main criticisms I've heard of 131 is that it's difficult to understand. It's too complicated. And I think not enough people yet understand why politics is not working for them, why they need change. I find that surprising because I think it seems pretty obvious why we need change. But so are there other proposals that we should promote that are not as complicated for the voter to understand?
Well, balanced ballot is actually very easy. So next month we'll talk about balanced ballot. Cumulative voting is very easy, but and is used as a semi-proportional method in especially a lot of places in the South to deal with the Voting Rights Act. Okay, let's see, I'm putting up the Zoom link for the book group. I think that's what you wanted, right? Okay, there it is. And I didn't explain it. Yeah, I mean, if we had as much money as Ken Theory, we could just say, this is my favorite voting method, and then pour a bunch of money into it, hire the consultants, hire the lawyers. I mean, he spent a lot of money on consultants and lawyers and pollsters, and he went with something that Unite America is a big fan of, so they've put a bunch of money into it. When you talk to local people, they say, nobody asked me about the voting method. They want to know about the potholes. And so it's a tough question. You said it's complicated. It's unnecessarily complicated. I think it'd be better to have one system instead of two, but Prop 131 introduces the all-candidate primary for some offices and regular old-fashioned partisan primaries for others. Why? I don't know. Anyway.
Neil's muted.
I see now that I'm muted. Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, I think we'll know a lot more to answer these great questions after the election. I think we'll get a lot of analysis of this. From my perspective, I agree with you that I wish more people saw the problems and cared about this. What has really distressed me just in the last day or two is hearing some very I'll just say it. I mean, progressive forces in Boulder a century ago instituted real progressive reform, which was ranked twice multi-winner proportional representation in Boulder. And now I'm seeing progressive forces say, oh my God, this primary reform might damage our ability to have a supermajority in the legislature, and so it's a bad thing. And I'm thinking, like, since when did progressivism go from promoting democracy to promoting the ability to force your opponent out?
Do you have a progressive supermajority?
We have a Democratic supermajority.
I think we have it in one house and we're short one vote in the other house. We also, I mean, I don't know, we're the most polarized state or something. I mean, certainly the pro Prop 131 people are saying that, but also Marcus showed me a graph that shows that Colorado is the most polarized, and I don't know how they measure polarization, but yeah. So Neil, you asked about, are these two tied together, the primary and the general? I think they're tied together for the covered offices. They keep using the word for covered offices. This is the way it's going to work. Well, no, maybe they're not tied together. I don't know. I should go read that more carefully. That's an excellent question. I'm inclined to stop the meeting.
Thank you.
There is a severability clause, section 34 in Prop 131. But that's all I know.
But you don't know what it says?
Well, I mean, I can read it to you. It's one paragraph. It says, if any provision of this initiative or the application of any provision of this initiative to any person, office, or circumstance is held to be unconstitutional, the remainder of this initiative and the application of its provision to any person, office, or circumstance shall not be affected by the holding. So it only applies to unconstitutional.
Yeah.
And that's not, it hasn't been ruled unconstitutional, so. But yeah,
But yeah, that doesn't necessarily resolve the question, because if you have
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask
a later
Andrea that
um,
question.
statutory language that says we're going to do ranked choice and do this primary in the
I'm
face
gonna ask,
of existing law, I don't know.
so Andrea Wilkins is is a lawyer. She's the state league lobbyist, and she's speaking tomorrow on Rocky Mountain Community Radio at 6 p.m. and asked if we had anything we needed to talk about, and I'm gonna ask her that question.
Please, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Well, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Betty. Betty, do you want to come to future meetings? I don't know how you heard about this one.
I got an email about it. So I think I probably signed up for an email on an email list at the convention or something like that. I'm not sure. But I got
Okay,
an email about it.
okay,
Sure. Thank you.
okay. I'll make sure I get your email address from the state office so that I can include
Well,
you
I
in the
can
future.
put it right here.
Betty asks about the Lisa Murkowski vote. That did happen. Lisa ran as a write-in before this bill. I don't think anybody was questioning the fact that she would make it into the top 4, but what, that election really demonstrated how strong independent streak is in Alaska more than anything.
Right. So in Vermont today, the way the law is, if somebody loses their primary, they cannot sign up as an independent.
Oh my God.
It's sort of loser law. A lot of places are like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not a fan of that.
Exactly. I mean, parties do so much. This is back to like what's wrong with our elections. Parties do so much to avoid competition. It is sickening. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that I say to people when they say, wait, how could you support 131? It's like, you just have no idea how unfair the current system is.
But do
Yeah.
you want to have, I mean, I want competition. I mean, I totally want competition, but I don't know if I want 5. Like, I look at our ballot, it's long. Would I want to have to think about ranking 5 candidates? 4 seems like plenty to me.
Well, you can just rank 2 or 3 if you don't like the others or don't know about them.
course.
You can just rank them. It depends on how your law is written, but the way anything has been proposed in America has not required
Right.
people to rank them all.
But
Right.
ballot space is a big issue. And having to list 5 candidates on every one of, I calculated this, it might be like 10 or 12 different contests, means you have multiple page ballots, which
Right. And
audit's much less efficient. It costs a bunch more money. It's very confusing. Clerks absolutely hate multiple page ballots.
yeah, but the difference between 4 and 5 is not huge. The difference between what we have right now with just, the primary ballot having this one's for this party and that one's for that, the ballots are not that confusing, but they're very wasteful. In Vermont, we have open primaries where it's not a blanket primary where they're all on one ballot. Rather, you have one primary for each party, and you don't
That's a
have to
real-
say in advance who you
That's a
want.
real open
So
primary. Yeah.
so they mail you all 3 of those ballots, and you have to like choose which one you're going to fill out and throw the other and include the other 2 in the ballot with if you're doing a mail-in. And so the idea is supposed to be that it's private and you don't have to say which party you're going to be filling it out for. But if you go in person, people are surprised and like, oh, you're asking me which party? I thought we didn't have to declare a party here. So it's very confusing. And that's actually something in favor of ranked choice voting, is to remove that level of confusion about the number of ballots people get and what they have to do with them all.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Good to know. Vermont and Minnesota, I now know people who are in real open primary states. I mean, this is a jungle primary there, or an all candidate primary that we're proposing in Colorado, that you're proposing in Idaho. But you know, you've probably had open primaries for a long time in Vermont, where you could go and vote any party's primary, but you only get to shop in one store. You only get to shop in the Republican store only, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly, which is frustrating. And there are many who say, oh, but you would have you know, strategic voting, and people would be voting like for the Democrat they think is the easiest to beat if you're a Republican. And so they want to be able to vote for the parties where there's actually competition, and vote for the positions where there's actually competition, but then they want to be able to be strategic on the other one. And we don't want to have that. But if you have the single ballot, you don't, you know, you want to be sure your candidate's in that top 5.
It's not hard. You get 20% of the vote, you're automatically in the top 5. And probably if you get 5% of the vote, you're going to be in the top 5. Because, you know, suppose somebody gets 40%, somebody gets 30%. I mean, you're getting down to pretty small numbers by the time you're getting to the 4th or 5th person. So
Yeah.
Right. The main reason that I think it's important to have that primary, if there are a lot of candidates, is that once you get like 12 candidates or something, you're talking about such small numbers that each one might get, that it's really not a very good assessment of who should be the 5 in the end that go on there. So I do think if you have a lot of candidates, and I don't know where the break off in my brain, I don't know the math behind it, but I kind of feel like 7 or 8 is too many.
I just am not seeing that many candidates run, you know. And
Well, when the Republican presidential primary in 2016, there were like 12 or 13.
We're not doing presidential.
Yeah.
Presidential is
Oh.
not included in this, so yeah. Okay, I am going to run. Bye, everybody.
Time to go.
I guess I'm going
Bye-bye.
to stop the recording somehow.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I think I stop it up here.
Up here. You want me to do it?